Om Bhadrang Karnebhi Shrunuyama Devaha Bhadram Pashyemakshabhiryajatraha Sthirairangai Stuštuvagam Sastanubihi Vyashema Devahitai Yadayuhu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we hear with our ears what is auspicious. May we see with our eyes what is auspicious. May we enjoy with strong limbs and bodies the life allotted to us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. The subject this morning is Swami Trigunatitananda. Last week we spoke about Swami Trigunatitananda. This is our noble heritage. Us meaning, particularly us in this society. We have this grand tradition. It isn't that this center was started by one person coming to San Francisco and thinking, oh yes, it would be a nice place. Let me see if people are interested in these ideas. It was not just that. The people who came here were of an extraordinary kind. The first person, of course, is Swami Vivekananda himself. On his second trip to the West, he came to the West Coast. On the first trip, he had his well-known appearance at the Parliament of Religions and had a tremendous effect at that time, went all over the East and Middle West and gave many talks, many inspiring lectures, which some of them were written down, some notes were taken actually verbatim by a stenographer that was not only was hired to do this, but became the Swami's follower and followed him, in fact, to India later. So we have a lot of activity was in that first trip, a lot of events that are still recounted. On the second trip, it was much more casual, in the sense that actually Swami Vivekananda came in order to recover his health. He was not doing very well in India after having had a very exhaustive few years, and it was decided that he should go to the West so that he would get some rest, because in India he was constantly in high demand and extremely active. So he came, and basically he had nothing planned for his stay here. There was no program that had been set out for him by the people who had been carrying on the work here during his absence, that is, here being in New York and in that area. So when he finally, he came to San Francisco because one of his disciples, her brother, was ill in Los Angeles and on the point of dying, and she thought she ought to go. And so he told her, well, go to Los Angeles and see if anyone is interested there, and if you can get up some lectures, talks, then I will come. And that's actually what happened, in a very casual way like that. Then also San Francisco, it was again said in a very casual way, well, they may be interested in what you have to say in San Francisco also. And what actually happened was there was at the First Unitarian Church in Oakland, the pastor, Benjamin Fay Mills, had organized the Parliament of Religions. So it was a natural idea Swami Vivekananda would go and attend and give some of his inspiring lectures and instructions there, which is actually what happened. And but there was one lady with him who Swamiji asked her to go ahead before his Oakland appointments and try to organize some lectures in San Francisco. She did, and that's how he came here. So in a very more or less casual way, this started. But he found in San Francisco, of course in Los Angeles there was a strong response also, but in the people in San Francisco, for some reason he told them, I will send you a teacher. I have to go back to India, but I will send you a teacher who will continue, who actually lives the philosophy in his daily life that I have taught. And he was talking about Swami Trigunatitananda, about whom we spoke last week. Anyhow, Swami Trigunatitananda was, after a couple of years here in San Francisco, for various circumstances, he decided that he should go back to India, at least to consult with Swami Vivekananda. And the intention was that, most probably, that he would come back after that and continue leading this society which Swami Vivekananda had founded. But as it turned out, he was headed back to India by ship, of course, and when he reached the port of Rangoon, he heard Swamiji had passed away, and then he decided he was not going to come back to the West. He was going to immerse himself in spiritual practice in India, just the wandering monk, or staying in one place, totally absorbed in the ideas of spiritual life, totally absorbed in his concentration on the essence, the source, the inspiration, the start, the ideal of everything, that is the supreme reality, whatever name you give to it. So that, in fact, is how he spent the rest of his life. Now, following him, Swami Vivekananda, although he had passed away by the time the next Swami came here, he made the choice, yes, this Swami should go. So this was Swami Trigunatitananda. Now, those names, Turiyananda, Trigunatitananda, were all given by Swami Vivekananda himself when the Brotherhood was just beginning to be established. But Swamiji told Swami Trigunatitananda, my boy, you have such a long name, a death-defying name. See, the powerful names are not Hari or all the very Rama or Krishna, the very simple names. No, your idea seems to be that this a long name is more imposing and will keep away the Lord of Death, a death-defying name. Of course, he himself had given him that name. So he asked him to shorten it. So thereafter that Ananda, he left out. It just became Swami Trigunatita. Of course, you could say the Ananda was with him already anyway. He didn't have to say it. He didn't have to repeat it. Now, Swami Trigunatita was an extraordinary personality. In all of the direct disciples, each in their own way, direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, was an extraordinary personality. I mean, even if you don't go into the spiritual life that they led, the spiritual realizations that they had achieved, just in their ordinary lives, they were striking. And we mentioned some of that about Swami Trigunatitananda last week. Now, Swami Trigunatita was built of the same substance. And he also went and on these vast pilgrimages. His ideal, one of his strong ideals was to go to Tibet. Because in Tibet, there is one area which is very sacred to Shiva. Shiva is perceived or is conceived of as a divinity, a deity, an ideal personality, absorbed in eternal meditation, totally conscious of God all the time. That is what we're trying to achieve in meditation. By the way, in case it had not become clear, meditation is not just some small, on-the-way goal. The goal of meditation is to experience what is real. And what is real is not any of the ordinary things that we normally see. Everything we normally see has come into existence, and eventually it'll be transformed into something else, or anyway it'll change its form, it'll disappear. So what is the purpose of meditation really? Is to discover that which is at the core of everything, which does not change. Every perception of ours, every thought, every expression of ours is a mixture of two things. Something which changes and something which does not change. Both of these are, every perception is that pratibodha viditam from the Kena Upanishad. It is to be perceived in every bodha, every perception. So this whole universe is composed of those two ideas. There is something here which obviously changes. We see that around us obviously all the time. What we don't see, but what we really intuitively understand, because when somebody tells us about it, there is an idea of, there's a recognition in us, yes, that could well be. I don't have any proof of it, but that could well be. Which shows us that it's very fundamental to our own nature to have that idea. And these great souls who have gone deep into spiritual practice, into prayer, into meditation, into all these things that every religion talks about, they have perceived that. The point is, where is God? The answer is, where is God not? That divine reality is present everywhere. And it's present in this system of thought. It's present as that which does not change in all of our perceptions. So every perception is made up of that which changes or could possibly change. Anyway, something that has a temporal nature. But every perception at the same time perceives a background to everything that changes. And that background is the reality, is the divinity, is whatever name you want to give it, that which never changes. So these Swamis, as they wander around, the idea is not to pay much attention to the needs, the everyday needs, because all of our thought is generally centered on that, what we need for every day, what we need for the maintenance of our life, and so forth. And that is necessary, that is fine. But some people feel, no, I want to spend most of my time trying to perceive that which never changes. And generally people have great compassion toward that, great appreciation for that ideal. So in every civilization, there is a provision for people like who have that particular ideal. And in India, that has been traditionally accorded to the wandering monks. Their ideas, they go from place to place because they don't want to become attached to any particular place. So the teacher of Sri Ramakrishna, who taught him the Advaita and guided him in that practice, Totapuri was his name. He was a monk of that type who would not stay more than 3 days in any one place, lest he become attached to the surface of things. By constantly changing the surface, this is a ploy, you could say. It's a method. It's a practice. You change the surface so that you don't become attached to it. But your intensity of prayer and study and meditation keeps on unabated. And if you're not attached to the surface, there's a greater possibility of becoming attached to that which is at the core of things. So this wandering life, these first disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, all of them tended in that direction. There's only one who actually didn't, out of this generally accepted 16 monastic disciples, there was only one, Swami Ramakrishnananda, who never went out for this wandering life. But he was so thoroughly fixed on the reality of God as practiced in the daily worships that he did, that really it wasn't essential for him to do that. But for the others, they followed that standard tradition of wandering. And there's a great freedom in it. You're not attached to anything, you're not obligated to anything. You can be absorbed in the concentration on the inner truth, the inner reality. And that is wonderful, and not only in India, but in all Buddhist countries, that is the tradition. Even in, there's a group of monks in the north of San Francisco, here in Redwood Valley. They follow the tradition that there's no kitchen in their monastery at all. Every day, even though they live out in the country, every day they go out with a begging bowl, and one bowl full is their substance for the whole day. And the people are happy to give that, because in doing that, this is a totally unselfish thing. because the people who give that food give it only for the spiritual purpose. They know these monks will use it for that, so they feel greatly benefited by doing that. Anyway, so this is even in this country, there are people who practice that sort of tradition. Anyway, Swami Trigunatita did it with a vengeance. He wanted to go to Tibet to see that holy place, Mount Kailas, and there's a lake associated with that, Manasarovar. And so there was great eagerness for him to try to reach that place. Nowadays, you can fly in to a place near, you go from Kathmandu, I think in Nepal, you go to a place somewhere near there. You have to get permission from the local government to do that. But now they go by jeep, they go, a few days. But the altitude is so high that even if you go by jeep, you can hardly breathe up there. You have to acclimatize yourself to the altitude. Anyway, it's a holy place, revered as the traditional abode of Shiva, or the abode of a divine. It's a divine reality that is manifesting itself there. A holy place of pilgrimage. Now, but in those days you had to do it on foot, climbing up passes that go over 16,000 feet, where there's no possibility of begging, there are no buildings. Character, that was the character of the person. Also, he had control over his own body. He could fast for days. Or if once food became available, he could eat enormous quantities that would last him for a long time. So he was, in many of these simple ways, he was extraordinary to begin with. But he was extraordinary in other more profound ways as well, which is the core of the matter, which is really the heart of what we want to discuss here. He had been able to achieve a very deep level of understanding of realization of that divine reality. And this had imbued him with such tremendous intensity that whatever he did was of an extraordinary nature. Before he left India, there was a famine in West Bengal, and though he had no experience in any of this, he organized the local people in such a way, with such expertise and such intense determination, that the local government became extremely grateful to him for his efforts, and he became very successful at relieving the famine conditions of these people. So, and then another extraordinary thing he did while he was still in India, Swami Vivekananda asked him to start a Bengali magazine. Now, starting a magazine means you have to provide articles for it. You have to go around and provide a readership for it. You have to be able to sell the magazine. Before that, of course, you have to be able to print it and publish it. So starting from ground zero to total completion, he simply took up that task. The leader, Swami Vivekananda, had asked him to start a Bengali magazine. So first he has to get a printing press to print it. I mean, this was not just writing something sitting at the internet and click, 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 everything is in, and then you don't even have to mail it off. You can email it off. It's all, everything's totally simplified nowadays. In those days, everything had to be done by hand. He had to write the articles, and he had to edit them himself. He had to publish it himself. He did that in San Francisco. He started a magazine here called The Voice of Freedom, in which literally everything he had to print it. It had to be printed here. It had to be bound. He had to get the subscribers for it. Otherwise, to whom is this magazine going? So he got the subscribers for it, as well as writing everything, as well as printing. In those days, when you printed things, there's a picture of one person doing printing in the temple, in the press that was in the old temple. You take a sort of a wooden cradle, and then each letter you have to put in by hand. Each letter of every article you have to put in by hand. It isn't that you could type the thing and it will clackety-clack and everything is established for you. Not at all. Letter by letter, the whole magazine had to be assembled, and then that font, that type is put into the press, and then you have to crank the thing, and it'll print each page. Then you have to bind the pages. Then you have to find the subscribers who are interested in what you have to say, and you have to convince them that they should subscribe to the magazine and pay for it. So from beginning to end, he did that. This was his, with that tremendous thoroughness, enthusiasm, and total confidence, he went ahead and did that. So many initial things he was responsible for. He started, for instance, the first retreat. His idea was that there should be a place in the country. Of course, there was a retreat, Shanti Ashrama was there, but it was not in a place that was easily reachable. It didn't have any facilities. It was more or less a wilderness area, which to a great extent it still is. But Swami Trigunatitananda, see, one interesting thing is to compare these two Swamis, who were the early pioneers in our society. Swami Trigunatitananda did not do any of these practical things. His mind was totally absorbed in the transcendental vision. Swami Trigunatitananda's mind was equally absorbed in the transcendental vision, but his hands were fully active on the practical plane. So from the same spiritual heights, they worked in totally different directions. And the interesting thing as well is to see how people responded to that, how the members of the society responded to that. Swami Trigunatitananda was more, you could say, the traditional monastic type, absorbed in meditation, absorbed. He was the type who you'd expect to found a retreat in the country, a meditation retreat, where you're totally separate from the world. You have, even now, you go out to Shanti Ashrama, it's 86 miles away, and the last 30 miles, there's practically nobody. A few scattered ranches are there. And even the little highway that goes there, it's a 2-lane highway, which goes over the mountains, reaches. Even that, when you get to the edge of what you think is the property, you're not at the edge of the property, you're only at the beginning of a parcel of land that's now owned by the state of California. You still have to go 1 mile further inland. So the highway itself is in the wilderness, You have to go 1 mile more into the wilderness, and then you reach that small area which is Shanti Ashrama. And Swami Trigunatitananda chose a place for himself, a cabin for himself, in that Shanti Ashrama, which was isolated from the isolation from the isolation. He chose a location for the cabin which was isolated from the rest of the ashrama itself. It was not in the region where the few cabins that are there were located. So that was his. I mean, this is symbolic of his attitude. Swami Trigunatitananda, when he came to that same ashrama, he put his cabin right next to the entrance road so he could see and monitor everything that went on. And totally absorbed in that same project, but the method, the style was totally different. And also the disciples who followed him were also different. And that, of course, led to problems later on. They didn't always agree, and certain difficulties took place. But there's a type of disciple who appreciates the person, or the teacher, who is isolated and retired and totally absorbed, not only spiritually but also physically, totally absorbed and aloof and detached. And then there's a type of disciple who greatly appreciates the teacher, who is, while being absorbed in that same reality, but intensely active on this plane, intensely determined to achieve a type of development that is fully active and fully engaged in society and in all the purposes of the modern world. And those two types of devotees don't always agree. And that was one of the situations that, of course, arose. But we, as devotees now of the society, are the inheritors of both. And for us, we should really absorb both of those into ourselves. There is that abstract, totally exclusive, totally absorbed ideal. And then there is the saint who is totally involved in society and absolutely committed to that. So we have to realize, though, that it isn't always obvious, which is happening, and you'll find that there are disagreements for instance, there was a magazine that was published here in Swami Trigunatitananda's time, earlier. That magazine was published by Dr. Logan, who was one of the officers of the society. But he did it on his own, and he had his own ideals, and so he printed certain things that the Swami Trigunatitananda didn't think were fully reflecting the ideals of Vedanta and the philosophy. And so he tried to convince this person that he should alter that he should be more, that he should adhere more to the standard teachings that have been handed down for hundreds and thousands of years. Somehow he was not able to do that. Swami Trigunatitananda, when he first came, he had been told that this had been going on, that this magazine had been published with certain inaccuracies, and that It should be, things should be done in a more methodical way. So, first meeting with the devotees, they talked about it and was decided to do away with the whole thing altogether. So this is there was a direct approach, and then this was the indirect approach. The approach of the active, let's do it now, and then the approach of the persuasive. Now, the devotees also reflected that, and later on, see, Swami Trigunatita was totally a man of action, absorbed in Brahman, absorbed in that divine reality, but manifesting it fully in action. And not everybody appreciated that. They wanted a more retiring, a more obviously contemplative attitude. Swami Trigunatita was always absorbed in that divine reality. He had no need of being physically present as a contemplative, demonstrating a contemplative style of life. He felt that the important thing was action to get done what needed to be done. So a certain tension was there among those people who felt more this way and others felt more that way. It isn't that any of them were wrong or that there was anything that except goodwill on the part of both of them, but they were headed in different directions. So one has to realize that the spiritual ideal that one has accepted, has absorbed, can be realized on a practical plane in different ways. But most fundamentally of all, really speaking, on the practical plane, it cannot be realized at all. It's only when one is absorbed in that divine reality, the practical plane itself becomes divine, becomes a manifestation of that divine reality. When one sees God as present in every perception, pratibodha viditam, that is the resolution to the conflict. Once one tries to bring this down to the plane of action, different camps are there. I prefer this and I prefer that. The principle is the same, and the principle is not discussed, is not argued about. But the manifestation of it, how does it play out on this plane? That is where things differ. That is where spiritual traditions differ. If you look at every religion, you find at the heart of every religion is the idea that God exists. But when they manifested on this plane, there'll be different ways of demonstrating it. So this is one of this was also reflected in this history that I'm talking about. Now, what did Swami Trigunatita do in his pioneering work in this society? It's really quite extraordinary. He established what he called the first Hindu temple in the whole Western world. And that is what we call the Old Temple. And what makes it extraordinary, not that it's a place of worship where traditional Hindu methods of worship are practiced, not only that, because that sort of thing is practiced. In Hinduism, the traditional worship is basically done in the household anyway. Every house has its own little shrine, and they'll do their own worship, their own meditation, their own offerings in their shrine. It isn't the importance of temples is considered secondary. I mean, traditionally, because so many saints have gone to these temples, have realized high spiritual ideas in these temples. There is great holiness associated with them, but the basic obligation of each person is to worship. The worship should be done every day, should be done basically all the time, should be done actually within. One should be able to see that reality, that light. One should be able to see that light within and conduct the meditation and the worship within as first of all. And then it should be reflected in one's life in each house there'll be places where worship is also done. So it's basically done within oneself and within one's home. And so these temples are not considered of first importance. But here in the West, it's more, the churches and synagogues are considered more primary or more important. And so in that sense, this Hindu temple, the first Hindu temple in the Western world, takes on the significance here. Now, if you look at that temple today, you find so many towers, and each tower represents a different religion or is symbolic of a holy place associated with a different religion. The fact that all these towers are on one building is symbolic of the fact that all spiritual paths really lead to one goal. And that was considered an important thing, that you can see symbols that represent sacred sites of different religions all on the same structure. Another point was that in 1915, when the temple was completed in 1908, but in 1915, there was a Panama Pacific Exposition, which was a World's Fair. How it compared to the Chicago World's Fair is not clear, but it certainly was of that order of magnitude. It was a vast thing with many palatially looking buildings. Of course, they look palatial, but actually they're made of very flimsy materials. When I first came to San Francisco, this Palace of Fine Arts here in the Marina was made of plaster and cloth and on a sort of a wooden frame. And it was left over from 1915, and one wealthy person decided that he would donate money to convert all of that into concrete. So that was done. So now we have the Palace of Fine Arts in concrete and standing in majesty. They're very beautiful, lagoon, everything. But this was made originally out of wood and cloth and meant to be torn down after a few months. Anyway, this is the only building that's left of that exposition. But in 1915, there was a huge display there along the Marina Green. And thousands and thousands of people were expected to go there. Now that the temple, the old temple, was lit up with lights inside, under the balcony, outside. There were a lot of flags there. It was a very spectacular thing, and probably hundreds of thousands of people came to see it. So this message, Swami Trigunatita felt that this was Sri Ramakrishna's message to the modern world, that all these different religions are not contradictory, that they are expressions of a basic human urge to God, toward God. And so there should not be controversy between them. They all should consider themselves to be related. And this is, that explains In a way, one could wonder why should he build such an elaborate temple, but it was going to be seen by hundreds of thousands of people on the Marina Green, which was just a few blocks away. So this was his style, this was his method. He did not hide his light under a bushel. He put it on a candlestick so it could be seen throughout the house, throughout the city. And but also this is based on the fact that he felt the reality of this, and that what he was leading the students to, the people who came to the society, what he was leading them to was this basic Vedantic idea that there's no place in this universe where that divine reality does not exist. This is, and anyone who has seen that, as he himself had seen it and experienced it, by that fact alone, when he taught that reality, he acquired a certain persuasive power, a certain power of conviction that was extremely precious. And so he insisted that the disciples not concentrate. I mean, they should, in their practical lives, concentrate on all these details, but at heart, they should understand that what he was leading them to was God and God alone. And the idea that a person who has experienced that reality gains a certain authority to advise others became a very strong point of his teaching and of his method. So he was a very powerful magnet for people interested in spirituality. But not only that, he was a very powerful teacher who was able to convince people to go beyond their narrow, limited outlook and see that really it is God alone that exists. There is, in every phase of life that has to be lived, in every action that has to be demonstrated. So, but he did it in such a powerful way, the way of certainty. I mean, if you go to a doctor and you start arguing about the diagnosis that he has just made, and you say, well, no, doctor, I think, the medicine you prescribe is very good, but I don't think I'm in favor of that. I mean, this is, you've called in an expert to solve your problem, and then you say, no, yes, I understand you, this is a solution, but I don't really feel like doing it. I'm more inclined to do it in another way. That is really foolishness. If you've consulted an expert and received an expert opinion, then that is what should be followed. Otherwise, why did you bother to consult such an authority to begin with? That was at the background of many of the problems that occurred in the society. Some people were very unhappy with this, that the Swami was being so determined, and so, you could say, concentrated is one thing, dictatorial is another way of putting it. I mean, if you go to a hospital and you ask, you say, no, I don't want to take this, I don't feel like taking that. That is the, up to a certain point that can be done. And they will ask you, can you tolerate this, or what's your history? But then if they find, okay, now you need this operation, otherwise you're not going to survive, then for you to try to argue against that, then that becomes counterproductive. So, but that still is with us today. because we're not any different from what our ancestors were, 150 years ago. When we go to a great spiritual ideal or a spiritual teacher of some experience, and we're told that certain things should be done, I mean, they do not necessarily confine their suggestions just to spiritual ideas. Even in practical matters, Swami Trigunatita used to scold people terribly, even in very practical matters, because he saw that the essence, what stands between us and spiritual realization is really a knot in our own interior reality. That we feel I am important. And I am important in all physical things. I am important in all psychological things. But in spiritual matters, the I is what keeps us from experiencing God. That is the basic thing. And in our tradition, this is stated again and again. That is the profound core of it, that on all surface matters of this physical reality, matters of psychology, matters of taste, all these ideas we should have prominence, or what we think should be is center, is good, is central and is crucial and important. But when it comes to how to reach that spiritual reality, Swami Trigunatita made it quite clear that a person who has, like he was, has reached that reality, he is qualified to say, the way you're going is not going to reach you there. Or it may reach you there, but it's a long detour. I can show you a shorter route. So the spiritual teacher has to be followed in spiritual matters, just like the doctor has to be followed in physiological matters, or, anyone who's acting in that capacity. And some of the problems that Swami Trigunatita had, and there were problems that it came later. The society had certain divisions in it. The divisions later were healed. But all of these things came about because they did not have that basic concept that when it comes to the spiritual, the authority of those people who are put in positions of spiritual teaching, spiritual authority, they may have certain insights which people who have not approached that reality are not so likely to have. And so that in India it is stressed greatly that the teacher, spiritual teacher, faith in the spiritual teacher is one of the primary means of obtaining the experience of the reality of God. The spiritual teacher is the guide, and he has been appointed to that position, presumably, especially in strong spiritual traditions, has been appointed to that condition because to the people who appoint him, he is accepted as a spiritual teacher, as a spiritual guide. And so that loyalty to that is extremely important for our own spiritual welfare. So this is an important lesson that we have to keep in mind, that there is, just like there is a physical disease, a psychological or psychiatric disease, there's also a spiritual malaise. I won't call it a disease. Malaise means you're not quite up to the top of it. It's a little bit, mal means bad. You feel a little bad. You don't feel fully convinced. So those people who are the teachers in that tradition, they have to be given that same freedom as we give to doctors in the medical field or psychiatrists in psychology. Anyway, these are from all these great souls who've led this society in the past. We're very grateful to them all, and we're very happy that it has become part of our tradition, and we can learn a lot from reading what they have said. Swami, at the concluding part of the biography of Swami Trigunatita, there are a number of things that he wrote to, especially one of his disciples, Dhira, who was one of his principal disciples. And many of those things have a very profound meaning even for us today. As how we should behave, how we should look at things as we navigate this spiritual path. We're all on that path, going from a total absence of any spiritual feeling or spiritual inspiration or spiritual vision to what we hope will be the insight of complete spiritual vision. And so there are guides along that path, and those guides must never be transcended. If we accept one such guide, that relationship is eternal. One of our Swamis here used to say that relationship between the spiritual teacher and the disciple, it does not end with this life. It goes on, and that same inspiration will go into, if we have, as we go on from one existence to another, it goes on. And that same spiritual impulse will help us in the next incarnation. So it's with great devotion and great gratitude that we approach all these ideas. Thank you.